and welcome to Full Focus, where law and news intersect. I'm Crystal Parham. Every day we hear about yet another unarmed citizen being gunned down by police, and predominantly these citizens are people of color. What is going on in this country, and what can be done? Why are police gunning down unarmed African American men? Today we are joined by Gregory Ajose. He is a criminal defense attorney practicing in the state of New York, and he's also a former NYPD officer. He's here to give us his unique perspective on this very critical issue. Hello, Greg, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Crystal. Thank you for having me.
Greg, what is going on between the police and the people that they police?
Well, I think an argument can be made that it's something that's been going on for many, many years, generations even, and that people of color have been complaining about police brutality and police overreach for more years than I've been alive. It's just that now, in this modern era, every citizen walking down the street has a smartphone that's equipped with the capacity to videotape events. And so these incidents are being captured on video and then in turn being broadcast to the whole world so that everyone now knows the outrage that the minority community has expressed for many, many years.
So you think the smartphone is really like a game changer in terms of racial justice in this country? Is that your opinion, or would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. I mean, in the past, police officers were able to use deadly physical force, and their narrative of events is what held sway. They weren't questioned, and the only person who could refute what they said was usually dead. But now, with smartphones and video recordings, we're able to see the truth of many of these matters.
Do you think that it's that the police are just racist, or do you think it's something else that's a little bit more deeply ingrained in our society?
Well, when you're talking about American society, racism is interwoven into the fabric of America. From the founding of the nation, where black people were chattel, they were slaves, and in the Constitution they were considered 3/5 of a person when apportioning representation in the House of Representatives in Congress. So the distinction between black and white, with black people getting the short end of the sticks, has been built into this American culture, and it's part of all American systems. And so I would go as far to say the issue isn't one of bad police officers or racist police officers, but a racist system that systematically discriminates against and oppresses people of color.
Do you think it could be also because police, for some reason, are afraid or scared of African American men, like they see them as a threat?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that's an example of racism in popular culture. Whether it's in the news media or the entertainment industry, black men are portrayed as vicious, dangerous, hulking figures, and that permeates the subconscious of the American psyche to where people just reflexively fear African American men. And it's doubly so in police officers, I think, because their job does give them occasion to encounter people in the worst of circumstances, and so their notions of blacks being dangerous are reinforced and accentuated because of their employment.
Do you think part of the issue also could be that primarily several of these officers that are policing highly, heavily populated minority communities, they live in other neighborhoods or other communities, so maybe they're not even really familiar with the community or the people in the community, so what could really be they perceive as a threat is really actually not a threat?
Well, yes. I mean, you have police officers crossing both racial and cultural boundaries and policing communities where there's little commonality. So, and where there's no commonality, there's no empathy. A police officer who engages a subject who he sees as someone who could be his brother, his sister, a family member, he will empathize with that person and behave differently than he would behave with a subject who he views as an other, a stranger, a foreigner, something totally separate and apart and different from him and everything he knows and has experienced. And I think that's where there's a greater tendency to use force and to use even lethal force, because there's no empathy between the police officer and the subject with whom he's dealing with. He doesn't see that person as a person per se. He sees him as her or her as the other.
And when you were working in the NYPD, did you witness firsthand this discrimination between the police and the people they were policing?
Unfortunately, yes. And discrimination, there's a spectrum of discrimination, from the very trivial to the very, very serious. And certainly I've seen it from the whole range of, the lack of exercising of discretion in giving a parking summons or a traffic summons to a motorist who happens to be a person of color, up to and including the use of physical force on a person of color.
So you're saying that in their discretion, sometimes if the alleged offender was a person of color, it'd be more likely for them to get the summons than if they were a white person?
That is correct.
And was there any kind of precaution within the NYPD, an oversight committee, if you will, that would look into this type of discrimination?
Well, again, it's if you're cloaking the discrimination under the banner of discretion, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to prove that discrimination took place. I mean, if by policy and procedure an officer has the right to use discretion in certain instances, then who's to say, who's able to look into his heart to examine why he exercised discretion in one case and not in another? I mean, we can speculate, but you can't prove it, and that's the insidiousness of racism and prejudice. Sometimes it's very difficult, if not impossible, to prove.
So let's talk a little bit about your career in law, right, for a second. So you went from NYPD to become a criminal defense attorney. What is it like being on the other side, if you will, of the aisle? Do you see the same prejudices within the criminal justice system in the courtroom?
Well, I would say, ideally it shouldn't be considered the other side, because the criminal justice system, every member in that system should have the goal of seeking justice and seeking the truth, or seeking justice. And so if that's so, we're all on the same side. But unfortunately, human nature being what it is, it becomes a rivalry, and the overall mission is there's a loss of focus, and each side wants to win. Each side wants to look good. Each side wants to come out ahead, regardless of whether or not that's the right thing, as far as the case or the client or the defendant or the victim is concerned.
What are some changes you think that you would like to see, to help you in your criminal practice, or even, to help our young kids of color that are coming up in New York City?
Wow, that's a tough one, because again, the problems are societal, and how they manifest in the criminal justice system is just symptomatic of the bigger societal problem. But I think that I would key on the word empathy. I think that if a city has a minority population, that the people who are involved in policing, prosecuting, defending people in that system should be majority people of color also, so that there can be empathy and cultural understanding. And rather than the misunderstandings and misperceptions or biases that seem to be mostly prevalent when you're looking across racial lines.
Now let's just take a step back and talk about the history of the police. Is it true, I heard somewhere from someone who calls himself an expert in this area, is it true that the police were originally started to bring back runaway slaves? Do you know about this theory?
Well, it's not a theory. I mean, there is documented historical evidence from primary and secondary sources that indicate that the purpose of the constabulary and militias in the United States was to control the movement of slave populations, and B, after the end of slavery with the 13th Amendment, to control the populations of free black people. So certainly police departments have their genesis in the militias and patrols that were created to apprehend fugitive and runaway slaves and to control the free black population. That is a historical, verifiable fact.
It was so wonderful to have you on the show, and I'd like to have you back on to get some more legal perspective on this issue.
Thank you. It'd be a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you, Crystal. Bye-bye.